How to run 100 miles. Well, I'm sure everyone's really enthusiastic get into this topic and get going for yourself, so let me get right into the meat and potatoes of my content here. So, a series of steps then. Step number 1, place running shoes on your feet. Step number 2, place one foot in front of the other. Step 3, repeat step 2 to 100 miles. Easy, right? Now I suppose you could say that running or walking is about as natural of an activity that a person could do. We learn it as a child right away, and even as I watch my kids and other kids running across, you see such joy and energy and ease in the activity. But of course, once we put the distance in there and the repetitive nature of the 100 miles, it becomes very, very difficult, as you can imagine. And what I learned firsthand in my first 100-mile running event exactly 3 weeks ago. Now, I do want to mention a little bit about what happened during that race, but I also wanted to make sure that I can give you some take-home value or some things to think about as part of well-being here. So what's so difficult? Now, I should mention here that when we talk about 100 miles, that we're also can use that as a metaphor. So really thinking about if there's ever anything that you've thought of or wanted to do that seemed a little bit outside of your abilities. Now, what's so difficult? There's an expression out there amongst 100-mile racers to say that 90% about doing these races is mental, and the other 10% is in your head. So going on that theme, we go with this. What's so difficult then about this task that in its mechanical nature is quite easy? So first is to determine that we actually want to do it. So we're not going to be able to do something that's really difficult from our own perceptions unless we really, really want to, or else we won't have the motivation to carry it through. Second would be to decide that we can do it. Obviously, if we decide that we cannot, we're going to instantly put up a roadblock that we can't get past. We're not even going to try. And the third would be to take action, which is really that step from just sitting around not doing anything to actually implementing the steps to get you closer towards the goal. Now, I am used to doing longer presentations. I want to keep this short so we can do questions and allow for other speakers. So I want to concentrate on the one element I think is the most critical and that keeps us back the most, and that's deciding that we can. Now, here's a question for you here. You see, the thoughts, I can't do that, or that's impossible. Put up your hand if you've ever thought about something like that. You know, you ever had an idea, someone gave you a suggestion, and you just thought to yourself, it's just not possible for me. Put up your hand. Awesome. We have all hands up. Okay, if you don't have your hand up, you're probably lying, you know, self-deluded, or you just don't think high enough, all right? So yes, it's very, very common. So myself, everybody thinks about that at some point in time. Now, I find it very interesting, this idea where we place ourselves at different levels. You know, some people might think of themselves at this level of ability, other people might think up here, still others here. And I'm always fascinated about how we make this decision because it really is just our choice as far as where we believe that we stand and what we can do. So I do consider myself a critical thinker. I've had some difficulty accepting the term skeptic only because it seems like a lot of the topics traditionally discussed in some of these skeptical communities, those topics aren't necessarily something that I'm really passionate about. But what I am really passionate about is critically thinking, being skeptical of my own thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions about myself. Okay, and that's the key here, about myself. So whenever I catch myself saying, I can't do that, or that's impossible for me to do, I like to rephrase it, because I think it's a little bit of a lie going straight to that. So I like to say something similar to this. If I gained additional abilities and knowledge, I could do this even if I presently cannot. So it's an acknowledgement of the fact that I can't run 100 miles or whatever it might be at this current time, but also an acknowledgement that if you were to gain some abilities, experiences, or knowledge, that it could at least be possible to get closer to the goal. And by rephrasing it in this way, it changes again from being a roadblock to being, well, empowering, about being able to at least consider and think about what we can do. So what needs to happen then? We can learn, train, practice, perhaps take baby steps instead of leaping right to where we want to be, perhaps smaller steps along the way, more experiences, gain a mentor, or getting some education. But a point here again is to think about what steps can I do today to at least get closer to what I want to accomplish or experience. Again, removing the roadblock where we previously says we can't, we're not even going to try, to saying, well, what can we do? All right? This is a picture here of first part of the race, maybe about 7 or 8 hours into the race. This is my buddy Bob here. It's a 35-hour time limit, I should mention there. And my buddy Bob, who saw some updates on Facebook that I was going to do this race, he's been doing some races and he wanted to come run with me, so that was great. I had a companion. Now, I'm used to a lot of people saying to me, that's crazy what you're doing, but he's even more used to this because he gets it even more. You see, Bob has a bit of a story where he hadn't been able to run until very recently. Really bad knees, had a lot of knee surgeries, and even doctors said that you just shouldn't be running. And it wasn't until he actually took off his shoes and started running barefoot that he discovered that he can run forever. And you can actually notice he's got no shoes. So even the people in this race who do it look at him and say, "You're crazy." So there's different levels. Even the crazy people think other people are crazy too. So it's this different levels. Well, I want to see, this is my problem here. This is the problem that I had during the race. Do you guys recognize what this is? Garbage Hill, yeah, Westview Park here in Winnipeg. Now this hill is about the only hill we have around for training, right? And it's about that high, approximately. Okay, it might be a little bit higher, but I thought I was doing great. I went up and down some of the sheer sides. I kind of did these loop-to-loop and curl, like along the edge, up and down. And I went up to about 4 hours of doing that, and I thought that would be really great. Because this race is in Lethbridge. And is anyone familiar with Lethbridge? Yeah, and it's got the coulees and a lot of hills. And I was out there last year. Actually, I did a presentation out there. I stayed an extra day. I phoned the race organizer, and he told me where the easiest place to find to go do a little training. So I did it, and it was really hilly. Except I realized that the area that I trained on was actually one of the more tame areas. This is an actual photo of one of the trails. And I'm not even kidding. And like sometimes these 80% grades, like going up for like many-story buildings and then having to go down again, which is even more difficult and scary. And it wasn't just the fact that there was one hill, it was the repetitive nature of over and over and over. You guys know Lethbridge, the coulees just keep going and go north of the city as well. And which proved to be, well, very, very difficult. And so what ended up happening for me is I made it 50 miles into the race, about 16 hours of doing, well, that. Now, some people, the people that know me were thinking, oh no, Scott's going to be really disappointed or sad about this. And honestly, I would have thought that would have been my reaction as well. But in this case, actually, I felt really proud. Because one, it was 50 miles, well, 50 miles. It's a distance that I haven't run for a long time, probably at least good 8-9 years. And it was on a course that I just wasn't properly trained for, and it was extremely difficult. So it wasn't so much that I couldn't take an additional step at the point in time that I dropped out. I just looked at the next section. It was going to be 16 kilometers, sorry. It was probably going to take maybe 4 or 5 hours by that point. And I could just imagine, I could remember the hills because it was going to be the second loop, and I just couldn't stomach the idea because of how trashed my legs were at that point in time. So the question is then, does this mean that I cannot do it? Now, I actually think it goes the other way around. I'm actually very proud that I got halfway, and I think that's a demonstration of what I can do. So what I have now is I have about 3 sheets of paper with these point form notes of all the things that I can do differently in my training as well as during the race. A huge learning experience. In October, I have 2 50-mile races that I'm going to be running. Not nearly as difficult, but there is one that's going to be hilly. Next year, I have at least a 50-mile race, and I learned about a local, first time, a 24-hour race that I'm going to participate in. It's a timed one, so how long you can go in 24 hours has been great. And I'm signed up to come try this one again in 2 years, just because I believe that's going to take 2 years of training to significantly improve what I did before. Now the great thing is, though, and a unique thing about this sport, like 100-mile races, is that the people who do the best, like the fastest and most consistently finish, are actually in their early 50s. So I actually have, I'm 33, so I figure I have 20 years to make this happen, okay? So I see this as a positive thing. So if I do it, every 2 years for the next 20 years, and even if I don't make it in the next 9 attempts, on that 10th time with all that experience and confidence, because it really is a thinking person's game in this case, having to make the right decisions all the way throughout, I believe that this is something that I can do. So then I ask you then, what is something that you can't do? To think of something that you've wanted to do, something you thought about in the past, but you automatically thought of as being impossible. I think that, if we really thought about it, if not now, brainstorm later, we could think about something again. Oh, it'd be so great if I could do X. But we just said, no, you know what, I'm not a natural talent at this. I just don't know enough. However, to change the phrasing, rather than I cannot or it's impossible, to acknowledge that, if I gain additional experience or training or whatever I need to do, there's steps that I can take that even if I can't get to that extreme, whatever, I can at least get closer to where I want to be. To determine the action steps needed, because there's always steps to use to improve, to get from our current spot to where we might want to be. Take action and not be afraid to fail, and to learn and repeat as needed. Again, each step seeing failure as an opportunity to learn and move forward. And most importantly, to be critical, to use those skeptical skills to be critical of the beliefs that we have about ourselves and understand that a lot of times when we talk to ourselves, it's not really the truth. We're so easily duped by what we tell ourselves. We seem to believe that we can see the lies in others, but a lot of times we forget that sometimes when we tell ourselves that something's not possible or I cannot, that is something that should be skeptical of as well. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how to run 100 miles. Awesome.
So
yes.
What are some of the things that you wrote down that you would do differently?
Well, first of all, I have to train hills and more hills and more hills and more hills. I went out to Garbage Hill already. I'm trying to figure out how to make this happen, and I found there was one, I will have to do a little bit of traveling maybe to do some hill training, but I found there's this one path. I'm going to describe it for you guys if you're familiar with it. There's the parking lot at the top, and then on the east side, right off the parking lot, there's kind of a path that is really steep and pretty much goes right from the top to the bottom. Okay, it's about the steepest that they have. And so what I did the other day was 2 hours of going from the very top to the bottom, up and down, and eliminating all those useless flat points that I was using before, and it really did work my legs really, really well. So I'm going to do that, and also I'm going to I've seen a technique for putting screws in the bottom of your shoes, so I can actually go throughout the winter. That's something I've never done before, hill training in the winter. Another interesting thing I learned about in the race is that, see, me and Bob, we figured we'd have a lot of time, and so we said, we'll just take time at the aid stations so we can refuel, drink a lot, and because it got up to 42 degrees in the coulees, Celsius. It got really, really hot, yeah. So you had to drink like crazy. At one point, there's people puking all over the place. It was horrible. I only got a little nauseous at one point. But I realized that if we took 10 minutes at every aid station, it added up to be like 3.5 hours, at aid stations, and that's really significant. So I'm going to try to bring that down I had a whole bunch of food in my hotel room because this start-finish line was at the hotel, so I figured we'd go up and make kind of almost like a heated meal. Like I have celiac disease and a whole bunch of food sensitivities, so I can't eat a lot of their food, so I want to have a meal. But again, that took too long, and it just goes on and on and on. You know, different nutrition and hydration choices, and also the mentality, because there's so many things you say to yourself, you know, after midnight, after starting at 8 a.m. that don't make sense, but at that point in time, it totally made sense to stop. And I'm, yeah.
2 questions. Number 1 is, did anybody actually finish 100 miles? And the second question is, have you ever considered, or have you done it, running barefoot?
All right, great questions. It was actually out of, I think it was 52 runners, 16 finished. So it's a pretty high dropout rate. But you could do 3 loops is 100 miles, but there was a lot of people doing 50K, which was 1 loop, or or 2 loops, etc. Barefoot, I wanted to. I thought it was because there's a lot of studies that show that you run better and it's more natural and all that. But you know, the problem was I had a stress fracture when I was training with the track team at the university when I was in university. And before they identified the stress fracture, after a series of steps, they fitted me with orthotics, like custom orthotics. And so I've run 10 years with orthotics. And so I researched into it, and I started doing 2-minute light jogs like 2 times a week, and my arches got really, really sore. It was just really, really fatigued. So I realized that my desire to do really long races and my desire to do barefoot, they're not compatible. It would probably take me, 5-10 years to get strong enough. And also, you have to consider too that Bob, like, he's really big into the barefoot communities, all online and all that, and there's not really anyone that's done pure barefoot 100 miles the whole way. So that was definitely an intimidating factor. He switched into his Vibram 5 fingers. I don't know if you guys seen those. Yeah. Just thin rubber on the bottom, and because of a lot of the gravel and all that tearing apart his feet. And then he realized too, it was interesting. This is another thing. I'm going to consider using trail shoes because those really technical downhills. Like I was going down pretty good, but Bob was kind of slipping with his bare feet or Vibrams, and then he ended up putting these minimalist trail shoes on because he was afraid of slipping, especially with the dew. And all of a sudden, he flew down there, and he had to wait for me. And in fact, in retrospect, it was kind of a mistake, I think, us running together, because what happened was he was stronger on the uphills. I was stronger on those sections that were flats. So he would have to wait for me at times. I would have to wait for him. And so we were always the slowest of the 2 of us, even though we could have gone back and forth on each other. Or if he needed a lot of time at aid station and I need to go, I had to wait and all that. So that was one thing that we acknowledged, that it was probably not the best idea overall. But he actually went that next 16-kilometer section, and then he dropped out as well. So, yeah.
I noticed that your title is not how to run 100 hilly miles, so why don't you just go to Saskatchewan?
Yeah.
Cross it off your list.
Well, see, I wanted to do the 100-kilometer race in Lethbridge because I was out there. That was my plan, the 100-kilometer version. That was the 2 loops. But the problem is that, see, last year I did a 50-mile race. I had to drop out because of some real bad stomach problems I was having during it, very unpleasant. And so I thought, okay, I'll figure out nutrition for the next year. And I was doing that, but then I got bored. So I wanted to do some big race because I had had some success with nutrition in some shorter races. But then I found out that the 100-kilometer was sold out. But the 100-mile was still available. And so I thought, well, I could do 2 loops and say, well, 100 kilometers, that's what I wanted to do originally. Great. But then I had a couple of people I met up with. They were doing another 100-mile race down in the States. I don't remember the name of where it is, but it's almost flat. I thought, this is great. This is better than doing 100-mile in Lethbridge, way easier. But it ended up happening, the date was on my 10th wedding anniversary, so it wasn't going to happen there. So I decided to do this, and I guess it was a bit of a learning experience to know, and a maturity, I guess, to be satisfied with not finishing, but be satisfied with the accomplishment of the day, even though it's not recognized on paper. And it's not an easy thing necessarily to do, because you do a test, you want to see that 100% or 90 or 80% or whatever. But in this case, the only glory is sort of personal.
Do we still have time for another quick question?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So I'll make this quick. So you mentioned people in the early 50s. Obviously, I'm not. I hope it's obvious. So my father was actually quite obese. Had to go when the doctor said he had to get surgery on his legs. He was too big. Hates surgery, hates doctors. So what do? Start exercising. So he started, calling and bragging. I walked 2 kilometers today. And in a period of 2 years, he qualified for a random Boston Marathon.
No way. That's
So,
awesome.
Well, we're all proud, right?
Yeah.
But you talk to him, and instead of, you're kind of like get a mix of goals and be okay with failure, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And he's saying, instead of goals, I go running with him, and compared to him, I'm terrible. He says, don't push yourself. Don't. Just have fun. So if I get out of breath, no, we gotta stop. And so he claims, now I'm not sure how much he's just being a braggart and how much of this is actually true, but he claims he doesn't set goals, doesn't push himself, just has a lot of fun, and it comes naturally. How much can you relate to that?
Yeah, I'm not a fast runner. I've never been a fast runner, and that might be one of the reasons I like doing this, because in actuality, in training, the most difficult thing sometimes is to back off and run below almost a comfort zone. Because when you're running, like if I make this, whatever year it is, I'm sure I'm going to be close to the 35-hour limit, and I'm not going to be sprinting, So I was signed up for Manitoba Marathon, and I didn't end up doing it because I knew I was signed up for this, because I knew that I would try to run it somewhat fast, and it was going to be against my goals, because it was going to be at least twice as fast as I needed to train. And in fact, during parts of the race, Bob and I were jogging together, and I decided to switch it up, and I just did sort of a speed walk, and I was going just as fast. And so that was another thing I learned, is I have to train walking too, because that's going to be a big part. If I can walk fast, that's a really good way to recover. But yeah, I don't try to push it so much. It's interesting. I'm definitely goal oriented. See, I can't run for fun or for health or those sort of things. I have to have something to go for. And this scares me enough that I go and do it. And then I'll say I want to, run whatever amount of time today. But yeah, then I gotta ease off too. I realize I'm not getting necessarily into it, but yeah, some days, there was one time where I decided that I was going to run a 40-kilometer training run on one of my longer days, and I went 20K out, and then I just realized I just didn't have it that day, so I'm okay with that. I know that it's better to protect my body, and so I just went on the bus and went home on the way back. But sometimes you got to do it, because if you force yourself 20K, then you go overtrained, and I'm experienced with overtraining, so... Yes, sir?
For sort of a different perspective, not that I've ever attempted to run 100 miles, but I have run several marathons before, and the only one that actually went well for me was the one where I decided to run a marathon because I love running, and I'm like, oh, I'm actually in good enough shape. I could probably do this. Yeah. The ones where I tried to train for it, I may be less good at being goal-oriented. Those have gone dreadfully.
Well, whenever I went out to a marathon, and that's probably the longest race where I've really focused on time, is that I usually go out too fast and then just destroy myself at the end. Like, I'm trying to work on having the self-control of going too slow to begin with, so that I can speed up. Because when you're destroyed, whatever way physically, or your endurance system is shut down, you can lose way more time than the amount of time you gain by going a little faster at the beginning. But it is and that's why I think a lot of people who are older are better at this, is that the young guns want to go just kill it right from the beginning, but it's the older ones that know to go to invest the energy, to take the time to drink and to eat, and they know their body, and there's a certain maturity in the head, and to understand what's happening to your body and your mind, and to move on. And I think that's what it is. It isn't necessarily about physical ability, because obviously younger people will have a better, oftentimes, physical ability. Time for another question, or are we?
Actually, I just have one comment.
Have you been to Pembina Valley Provincial Park?
No, I'm not, honestly, it's not ringing a bell where that is.
It's on the Canadian-American border, just south of Morden. It's not Lethbridge, but it's better than Garbage Hill.
Yeah, Pembina Valley, you said?
Pembina Valley Provincial Park.
Okay, great. Because I know there's a lot of hills in Morden. So Spruce Woods had a 50-kilometer race this year, and that was really pretty. I mean, it was pretty good for hills.
Yeah.
And then that's where the 50 miles. They're going to have a 50-mile version in the spring, which I'm going to do, which is pretty good for that. But I will look it up. I appreciate that very much.
Is there some physiological net benefit? I mean, most runners I know are always injured.
Yeah. Well, I think they say something about 70% of runners get injured at least once a year or something like that. But I don't necessarily get injured, but I will get overtrained, or I will sense some sort of high level of fatigue in some area of my legs or whatever. And so I've learned over time that I know what overtraining feels like, so I'm okay with taking a week or two off or having some very short runs. So I don't pressure myself. I think that's where a lot of people get into it.